Hello, my friends. The most interesting development of the past week is not something that happened in public, but something that has not happened. Vladimir Putin's near total visibility blackout. In a world where every faction tries to read Moscow's intentions through the tiniest gestures, the absence of the central decision maker matters. Putin has been unusually quiet for close to 2 weeks, certainly since his meeting with senior Russian military officials and generals on 29 December, when they delivered what appears to have been the last major operational update. He held a brief meeting with a civilian defense ministry official on 30 December. On 31 December, he delivered a short New Year address to the Russian people. On 5 January, he received a report from Russian security services on the Ukrainian strike in the Kherson region against a hotel, an attack that reportedly killed around 29 civilians. He also made a publicized call with a 7-year-old boy at a charity event and appeared briefly at a church service on Russian Christmas Eve, which in Russia's calendar falls on 6 January. But anyone familiar with Putin's punishing schedule will recognize how abnormal this sustained silence is. The man runs Russia the way an operational commander runs a theater. Constant meetings, constant direction setting, constant signaling. Of course, he is entitled to rest, and it is the New Year holiday period. There are also rumors plausible, because they always appear in winter, that he has had a cold or flu. Yet he did not look ill at the church service. And even allowing for holiday downtime, the prolonged quiet while extraordinary events unfold across multiple fronts strongly suggests that a major debate is underway in the Kremlin. It suggests that competing proposals and strategic options are being presented, argued, weighed. It suggests there is a broader review of policy direction, and Putin does not want to speak publicly until that internal review is complete. We have seen this pattern before. After the Maidan events in February 2014 and the overthrow of President Yanukovych, the coup, call it what you will, Putin also disappeared for roughly 2 weeks, and then he reemerged and the Crimea sequence unfolded rapidly through March. So, yes, this is speculative, but it aligns with what we know about Putin's operational style: silence during internal consolidation, followed by decisive external action. While Putin remains off stage, events keep moving. Yesterday's major subject was the Oreshnik strike in western Ukraine. Throughout the day and into late evening, Ukrainian reports and some Russian commentary suggested the strike hit a major gas facility near Lviv. I have not yet seen definitive confirmation that this wasn't the case. The mayor of Lviv spoke about a reduction in gas pressure in boilers, and that sounded consistent with a hit against a large gas facility. That was the assumption I made yesterday. And I said plainly, if hypersonic warheads hit a methane-rich facility, you would expect a massive fireball. We did not see anything like the expected cinematic explosion. There were explanations offered over the course of the day. One was that the warhead design and mission profile were intended to penetrate the ground, rupture protective structures, and force a release of gas into the atmosphere, disabling the facility without producing the obvious fireball signature at the moment of impact. Stories circulated that methane was leaking and that this affected the night sky. Some described a rosy hue in clouds or the reflection of cloud cover. If methane truly was being released at scale, it raises an uncomfortable question. Methane can be dangerous, and if so, why wasn't there an urgent evacuation order? But we also must recognize a second fact. Ukrainian authorities have been moving aggressively to control information about the Oreshnik strike and the damage it did. That approach strongly resembles what followed the strike on the Yuzhmash facility in November 2024, when Kiev acted quickly to restrict the flow of information. The pattern is repeating. This morning, an entirely different theory began circulating, and at this stage it remains a theory. Without confirmation from either Ukrainian or Russian authorities, we do not know. The new theory relies on geolocation claims, and geolocation is not a magic wand. It is often treated as definitive by people who want certainty, but it is not. In this case, nighttime imagery, long distance, unclear angles, the reliability is arguably worse than usual. Still, the alternate theory is interesting, that the target was inside the metropolitan boundary of Lviv itself, specifically an airbase and an adjoining repair facility originally built in Soviet times to service MiG-29 fighters stationed there. That would make a certain kind of operational sense. There are also claims that the warheads were inert. Inert can mean several things. Not a conventional explosive detonation, but still capable of causing enormous damage through kinetic impact, especially at hypersonic velocities. If the strike truly occurred inside a city boundary, and if Moscow intended to avoid mass civilian casualties and the political blowback that would follow a giant explosion, then selecting a low explosive or non-explosive configuration would be rational. That does not make the strike humane war as war, but it can reflect a cold calculation, achieve industrial or military effect while limiting the civilian death toll that would create major propaganda and diplomatic costs. This matters because I have received information that the Oreshnik system likely supports multiple warhead options ranging from inert penetrators to explosive mixtures, including the aluminum-based explosive mixture discussed previously. There are also rumors of chemical payload options, though I suspect confusion here, possibly conflation with a different developmental system, something like a long-range, heavy thermobaric concept, analogous, in effect not in exact form, to a TOS-1 type idea scaled up and extended. And of course, there is the nuclear option in the background, though obviously that is not what is being used. The key point is simple. If the Russians have a menu of warhead configurations and chose a configuration designed to reduce blast while maximizing damage against a target inside an urban area, then this strike was more than a demonstration. It was a demonstration and an operational proof of concept, the ability to hit targets embedded in cities while limiting collateral damage. And that has implications. It potentially makes future Oreshnik strikes in Kyiv easier to execute politically. It signals to Western planners in London and Paris that if they are considering hubs, bases, or support nodes inside Western Ukrainian towns, the concept British Prime Minister Starmer has been talking about, Russia is advertising the capacity to strike those hubs without flattening the surrounding residential districts. In some respects, that would be a more impressive display of capability than striking an isolated gas storage site. But I repeat, this is speculative. It may still turn out the target was the gas facility. It may turn out the methane leak story is correct. Keep that uncertainty in mind. What I have no doubt about is that the strike hit a real target. Some commentators insist this was pure theater, a performance designed only to show range, speed, and the inability of Ukrainian air defenses to intercept. Yes, the strike demonstrates those things. But Russia does not launch a strategic class weapon like this as a firework. It is not a stage prop. It is used because someone wants something destroyed or at minimum severely degraded. There are also claims that the strike indicates technical improvements since the November 2024 Oreshnik use. Higher speed profiles, even lower interceptability, greater precision, tighter clustering of impact points. I am not the person to verify those technical claims, and frankly, neither is anyone who is not sitting on classified telemetry. But the operational logic is clear. This was not performance art. Now consider the stated Russian justification. Retaliation for the strike against Putin's Valdai residence in November, an attack Moscow would naturally interpret as a strike on a presidential command and control node, and potentially as an attempted assassination. If that is Russia's frame, then the question of why a secretive target becomes more pointed. Both sides staying tight-lipped can itself be evidence that the target is politically explosive. Another possibility, entirely speculative but plausible, has been circulating online that the strike targeted a Western intelligence-related facility, the U.S. media has, in effect, acknowledged that the CIA plays a central role in Ukraine's drone warfare program against Russia. If Moscow believes the CIA, or U.S. intelligence more broadly, had a hand in the Valdai attack, then a retaliatory strike against a Western-linked command and control node in Western Ukraine is exactly the kind of signal Moscow would send. Lviv is a major hub for Western military activity. Aid from Poland and the broader West flows through that region. Western technicians, advisors, and intelligence-connected personnel are present. It is entirely plausible that facilities exist there, perhaps embedded within or near an airbase. If so, Russia might not even need to kill anyone to make the point. The Russians gave warning to the United States before the strike. A facility, if it existed, could have been evacuated. The purpose would be the message. Attacks like Valdai will not be tolerated, and Russia can strike the nerve centers that support them. Again, theory, no confirmation. But it fits the strategic logic, and it fits the silence from both sides. Now set these theories aside and look at what continues to unfold in the broader war. In Putin's relative public absence, other Russian officials have stepped forward. Dmitry Medvedev has been particularly active. He posted on X that Europe's dimwits have been told 1,000 times, Russia will not accept European or NATO troops in Ukraine. Well, come on then, he wrote in essence, this is what you get, and he attached video of the Oreshnik strike. For the record, that message itself indirectly supports the idea that the target may have had some Western personnel relevance. It reads like a warning not merely to Kyiv, but to London, Paris, and the broader NATO political class. Medvedev's messaging is simple: if you want this fight, bring it. Russia is ready. This reflects what I have argued consistently. Russia's position is hardening, and this is not merely inference, the Russians have said it. During Putin's last telephone call with Trump in December after Trump's meeting with Zelensky, Putin informed Trump about the Valdai attack and explicitly said it would cause Russia to take a harder line in negotiations with Ukraine, with the Americans revising positions previously held in a harsher direction. Everything we have seen since is consistent with that warning. If a major strategic discussion is underway in Moscow defining what harder line means operationally and politically, that would also explain Putin's silence. It might also explain Medvedev's tone. He almost sounds gleeful. That is not random. Medvedev has been positioning himself as the loyalist hardliner and the skeptic of negotiations. Western commentary often treats Medvedev as a clownish figure not to be taken seriously. That is a mistake. He is a former president and prime minister, yes, but his current institutional position matters. He is deputy head of Russia's Security Council, Russia's most important policy coordination body. More importantly, since autumn 2022, he has been placed in charge of the Military Industrial Commission. This point is constantly underappreciated. Over the Putin era, modern Russian institutions have come to mirror in function earlier Soviet governing bodies. The Security Council, State Council, and presidential executive apparatus increasingly resemble Soviet-era mechanisms for strategic coordination. In the case of the Military Industrial Commission, the similarity is almost exact. The Soviet Union had a Military Industrial Commission with effectively the same purpose. Such bodies oversee the entire military-industrial complex, senior civilian officials working with military representation to set production targets, coordinate factory output, and align industrial throughput with operational military demand. Medvedev chairing that structure means he is one of the central figures behind Russia's massive increase in weapons production, an increase that the West keeps calling impossible even while it happens. The same Western culture that sneers Russia is a gas station masquerading as a country is forced to confront the reality that Russia is producing more munitions and systems than the collective West in many categories, and doing so repeatedly. Yet the Western political media class still refuses to take seriously the official most closely linked to the machinery that made this surge possible. And there is another key detail: senior military officers sit within that commission structure. One is the chief of the general staff, General Gerasimov. That means Medvedev is in regular direct contact with the operational military leadership. His aggressive messaging likely reflects not only his personal posture, but the prevailing sentiment within the Russian military, industrial, and military command apparatus. When he says bring it on, he may be voicing what he hears daily from the men organizing production and prosecuting the war. Now let me return briefly to the Marinara tanker episode, because the same people who endlessly narrate Russian weakness are recycling it as proof Russia cannot defend its interests at sea. They say the Russian military took no action to protect Marinara. They speculate about submarines and warships and why Moscow did not intervene. Here is the reality. There is no credible basis to assume Russian units were in a position to intervene at the moment the incident unfolded. The seizure appears to have taken place unexpectedly. Russia was not prepared for that specific operational move in that specific time and place. What Russia did do was establish a red line that the Americans appear to be acknowledging, at least for now. The United States released 2 Russian crew members. That is not a minor detail. That is a signal. It indicates Washington understood the seizure touched nerves. It did not want to inflame beyond a certain threshold. If Russia becomes more assertive, and that trajectory is visible, then the Marinara incident and the broader Venezuela-linked tanker disruptions are an illustration of what the United States would face if it tried to impose a true sea blockade against Russia. Even attempting to seize a handful of tankers tied to Venezuelan trade has proven complicated and problematic. Marinara, an old slow tanker, pulled the U.S. military into a bizarre chase across the Atlantic. It took days, nearly a week, before U.S. forces caught and boarded it. That is one tanker. Other tankers in the Caribbean have played similar cat and mouse, and we are not talking about vast volumes. Venezuela's oil trade is comparatively small, involving perhaps a half dozen to a dozen vessels in these episodes. Now, compare that to the maritime trade tied to Russia, often described as involving around 1,000 ships operating worldwide, increasingly using Russian flags or Russian-linked registries. Tracking, intercepting, seizing, boarding, and detaining shipping on that scale would be a colossal undertaking even for the U.S. Navy. And the U.S. Navy, while large, is lopsided. Its force structure and shipbuilding emphasis has prioritized very large, high-end vessels, aircraft carriers, amphibious assault ships, Arleigh-Burke-class destroyers rather than the smaller surface combatants that historically were used to enforce blockades and hunt blockade runners, frigates, corvettes, and similar patrol-capable warships. In the Napoleonic era and in both world wars, those were the workhorses of blockade enforcement. You do not want to divert your premier high-end assets into endless global constabulary tasks. It is crushingly expensive, it degrades readiness, and it diverts the fleet from the missions it was designed to perform. Yet the United States currently has a weakness in exactly that category: frigates and corvettes. It has essentially no modern frigate fleet at scale, and it does not operate corvettes. Many NATO navies also appear short in these categories. And that is before you factor in what Russia might do to protect merchant traffic. A comprehensive U.S. blockade is not literally impossible in theory, but it becomes increasingly implausible in practice once you account for geography, law, and force structure. Interfering with Russian shipping in the Arctic is hardly credible when Russia has regional naval advantage there, and the Arctic is a strategic connective zone where Russian and Chinese interests can align. Russia conducts significant trade through the Black Sea and Mediterranean. Closing the Dardanelles to Russian merchant shipping would require Turkey's cooperation and would clash with the Montreux Convention. It is difficult to imagine Erdogan agreeing for multiple reasons. There is talk about closing northern straits, but in those theaters, Russia is not a passive target either. Over time, Russia may push more trade through Arctic and Black Sea routes, but the larger point stands. The dream of total blockade of Russian overseas trade is close to fantasy. And that is why Washington keeps revisiting sanctions, secondary sanctions, tariffs, punitive measures against China, India, and other buyers of Russian oil, because the maritime chokehold concept is not as clean as it sounds in op-ed columns. We are moving into a critical week. Zelensky claims he is coming to the United States to finalize security guarantees, the same guarantees Russia has already rejected. Senator Graham's promised bone-crushing sanctions bill is supposedly moving toward presentation. We will see what Washington actually does. Meanwhile, Russia continues the war, and Ukraine continues to degrade. The energy and heating crisis across Ukraine is catastrophic and worsening. Mayor Klitschko has urged residents of Kyiv to leave the city temporarily due to the escalating failure of water and energy systems. We now have more detail. Russian strikes around Kyiv have disrupted water treatment and distribution systems that supply not only drinking water, but hot water and heating circulation to large Soviet-era apartment blocks. In sub-zero temperatures, the risk is that water in pipes will freeze, triggering massive pipe ruptures, cascading infrastructure failures, and a long-running urban crisis that is not quickly repaired. If the reports circulating today about the Oreshnik strike are accurate, then Russia has demonstrated an ability to strike industrial facilities within cities while avoiding the kind of mass casualty collateral damage that would produce maximum international political blowback. That is strategically significant because it suggests Oreshnik strikes will not be a one-off. There is no defense against this system in the current Ukrainian inventory. Used against high-value point targets, air defenses, Patriot installations, energy nodes, the Oreshnik becomes a tool that can rapidly make urban life in Kyiv, Dnipro, Odessa, and other cities unbearable. The era in which Kyiv could pretend normality while the front bled out is ending. And if urban life collapses, heat gone, water unstable, pipes rupturing, apartment blocks becoming uninhabitable, then whatever remains of the Ukrainian economy collapses with it, along with inflation and social stability. The countryside has already been emptied in many areas. I was told in Budapest in autumn 2024 by a Hungarian diplomat how depopulated large rural regions had become. If major cities begin emptying too, Ukraine becomes a hollowed-out shell, an emptied countryside and emptied cities, a ghost land. Men fight at the front for a rear area that is literally disappearing. That is not sustainable. That stress will accelerate military breakdown. In an evening conversation yesterday, Daniel Davis pointed me to an article in the Kyiv Independent describing Russia's advantages: manpower, infantry depth, materiel, weapons superiority, and arguing that Russia's so-called maximalist objectives might become achievable in 2026. The mere fact that the Kyiv Independent is running that framing is telling. It implies that even within Ukrainian-aligned media spaces, a recognition is spreading. Defeat is no longer unthinkable. It is approaching. Now consider the frontline situation. Over the last 24 hours, new information indicates continued and possibly accelerating deterioration for Ukraine. In the Zaporizhia region, there are more reports of Russian advances near Huliopol. Huliopol fell in late December. After some reorganization, Russian forces continued advancing westward, breaking through successive Ukrainian defense lines. As discussed previously, this trajectory suggests that it may be only weeks before Oreshnik becomes surrounded. After that, the defensive logic collapses towards Zaporizhzhia city itself, which many analysts consider extremely difficult, if not impossible, for Ukraine to hold because of geography and Russian pressure from the eastern bank of the Dnipro. In and around Kostiantynivka, the large town east of Pokrovsk and Mirnorod, the reports describe Russia pressing from three sides. Russian forces have reportedly broken into the town from the south and are pushing toward central districts. Russian claims say they control more than half the buildings and around 40% of the territory. I have previously said I cannot independently verify those numbers, but maps have appeared showing Russian control of territory to the east and west and an incursion into the town itself. That implies semi-encirclement and that supply routes are increasingly under Russian drone control. This begins to resemble the pattern we saw in Pokrovsk around October. Supply lines compromised, pressure from multiple directions, significant penetration, Ukrainian resupply increasingly difficult. Heavy fighting remains, but it is difficult to imagine the battle dragging on as long as optimistic narratives in the West suggest. By the end of winter, the battle for Kostiantynivka may be resolved. One Russian military official even speculated it could end in February. The most dramatic news continues to come from the Lyman sector. Over the past few days, Russia appears to have achieved a breakthrough. Yesterday I said Russian forces seem to have reached and entered a town northwest of Lyman, fighting underway, and that if they captured it, Ukrainian supply into Sloviansk from the north would be compromised and Lyman's fate would effectively be sealed. If that capture occurs, Lyman could fall within weeks. This morning, reports appeared claiming Russian forces have entered the town and that there is no organized Ukrainian resistance. The claim is that Ukraine is so overstretched it cannot plug holes. The settlement may fall quickly. There are also reports that nearby locations north of that town are being captured as well. If true, then the entire northern defensive system around Sloviansk is collapsing. Lyman is close to falling. A broader communications crisis is forming in northern Donbass at the same time Ukraine faces pressure in the south near Pokrovsk and around Kostiantynivka. This is the cauldron dynamic. A cauldron is forming around Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. It is surprising how few people in the West will even acknowledge the shape of the operational map. But by spring, it is quite plausible it will form into the tightest, most dangerous encirclement threat Ukraine has faced in the war. So yes, 2026 is already shaping into a terrible year for Ukraine. 2024 was bad. 2025 was worse. 2026 may be existential. If Ukraine collapses this year, I would not be surprised. And I sense more people inside Kyiv's own political class understand it. This is why, whatever drama unfolds in Venezuela, it may prove strategically secondary, almost a punctuation mark, if Ukraine collapses in 2026. But Venezuela still matters because it exposes U.S. policy dysfunction. It increasingly appears that the speculation I and others have raised that Venezuela is turning into a debacle is correct. Donald Trump reportedly convened oil executives at the White House to pressure them into committing investment into Venezuela. He even opened the door for Russian and Chinese oil executives to attend. Unsurprisingly, they did not. The overriding result was a striking lack of enthusiasm. Exxon's head leading the largest U.S. oil company stated bluntly that Venezuela is uninvestable. Others were more diplomatic, but the overall impression was clear. Nobody serious wants to stake major capital on a country being treated as a geopolitical prize in Washington's internal power games. A separate analysis published by Larry Johnson on Sonar 2.1 cut through Trump's claims with basic arithmetic and basic oil market reality. The idea that Venezuelan oil could buffer a global shock if the Persian Gulf were closed due to a U.S. Israeli attack on Iran is nonsense. If Iran closed the Strait of Hormuz, the world oil market would be devastated. Roughly 72% of OPEC production comes from the Persian Gulf. Venezuela, though an OPEC member, produces around 700,000 barrels per day, roughly 2% of OPEC output. Venezuela cannot replace the Persian Gulf.